It's the Ross Tucker Football Podcast.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Wow, I look crazy, by the way, on this computer. Between the black eye last week and how crazy I look with trying to use the TV right here for light in this hotel room I'm at in Manhattan Beach, California for the NFL's broadcast boot camp, you guys really need to check out youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. I don't know. Is that like a dirt on the camera here? We're setting records here. I don't know what we're doing. I do know this, though. It is a Wisdom Wednesday, and we are getting the wisdom today of the one and only Greg Cosell. I love keeping you guys on your toes. You never know what day Greg's going to be on. Usually it's Thursday, although, like, programming note, the last Ross Tucker Football Podcast this week will be Friday. So you can check out Even Money podcast already, which was awesome, talking about the Masters, as well as first look at some of the season win total numbers. You can take a listen or watch the College Draft podcast, which was fantastic with Gene Clemens talking tight ends. We're going to record the Fantasy Feast podcast this morning as well. Today, though, it is Greg Cosell. Can't wait to name some of you as winners on Friday at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, to spread the word via social media. RossTucker.com for any of our sponsors like Raycon, like ExpressVPN, like LinkedIn, and then, of course, YouTube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, we are going to get into the corners because I love hearing about the top corners from you because I know you study them as much and as well as anybody. But I did want to get your thoughts on a few veteran players that have been in the news recently because I think it's important. You know, if they're in the news for different reasons, let's talk about just what they bring to the table. Stefon Diggs, and we don't talk about money with you often, Greg. Stefon Diggs this morning already gets a 4-year, $96 million extension, $70 million guaranteed, as the Bills see what's going on with Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams, and they want to make sure they've got Diggs for a long time. What is it, Greg, that makes him so good?
Well, I'm a big Diggs fan based on tape, and I think he's one of those guys that's a really good route runner, has a really good feel for understanding leverage of defenders, getting corners off their spot. That's the way it's talked about a lot with receivers, that particularly if it's a off coverage corner, you've got to get them off their spot. You've got to make them turn their body in the way that you want them to turn their body based on your route. I think Diggs is a great example of the fact that route running is not a function of straight line speed because he's not a 4.35 guy. It's an understanding of tempo, pace of routes, how to use a vertical stem, how to angle your stem, how to use your body, how to use feints with your head and your body. And as I said, to get corners off their spot, I think he can defeat press coverage. I think he's really, really good at understanding zone coverage, Ross, and finding voids within zones, because very often those voids don't show themselves until you're in the play. And you have to find that void in the zone to present yourself, to use a great Torrey Holt term that I heard years ago talking to Torrey at the Combine, to present yourself as flat and friendly to the quarterback. And I think that Stefon Diggs is really good at those things, and he can get vertical once in a while because of his understanding of how to break a corner's cushion and how to force a corner to just be off balance for that half a beat that causes transition and change of direction problems.
You know what I think is interesting? I think you can make a strong argument Devontae Adams, Stefon Diggs as the best wide receivers in the NFL. Tyreek Hill is kind of a different animal. But neither Devontae Adams nor Stefon Diggs are the kind of guys that tore up the combine or were first-round picks, Greg.
No, and as you and I both know, 40-yard dash times are not overly relevant for receivers. I mean, unless a guy's going to run a 4.8. Although having said that, I remember Anquan Baldwin running a 4.72 at the combine. I was there, and he did okay in his career. So 40-yard dash times are not necessarily a relevant measure of a receiver. A lot of great receivers in this league, you look at DeAndre Hopkins, I believe he ran a 4.57. Michael Thomas missed this past season, but was a great receiver and probably will be again. I believe he ran a 4.58. So that's not really a truly important measure of whether a receiver will be a really good one in the NFL.
Speaking of receivers, the guys whose name's been in the news a lot now as a potential trade candidate is DK Metcalf with the Seattle Seahawks. And I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to say DK Metcalf is a polarizing player, but I did want to get your opinion, Greg, on DK Metcalf as a player, what he brings to the table and what he would potentially bring to a new team, as there are a bunch of fan bases out there clamoring for him.
I don't think, to me, he's polarizing at all. I think he was a function and in many ways a victim of a very inconsistent week-to-week passing game. You know, you can always get the ball to a receiver, Ross. You know, this idea that that Metcalf would go a half and he wouldn't see the football, that's on the offense. That's not on Metcalf. You can always get a receiver the ball. So I don't think he's a polarizing player at all. I think we know what he is. He's a boundary X for the most part who has great vertical speed. He has great movement ability. In other words, crossers, routes where you're on the move. He's not necessarily a sit-down receiver. He's not necessarily a, come in and out of breaks and throttle down and sink your hips. He's not that kind of receiver. He's a runner. He's vertical. He can run crossers. He can run away from coverage. He's big. He's physical. There are not that many guys, if any, at that size that run like he does. So I don't think his traits are the least bit polarizing. I think he was in an offense that, for whatever reason, that's a whole different discussion, for whatever reason, did not have a consistent week-to-week pass game approach, and therefore did not get him the ball with the target share that he probably deserved.
I think it's a really good point, Greg. Really good point. I want to take at least a minute here just to ask you about Frank Gore.
One of my favorites.
Who retired. Yes, he retired since last week. I just, like I like to do, when you look back on Frank Gore, and obviously, 5 years from now, he'll be in the discussion for the Hall of Fame. What will you think of him? What will you tell people about Frank Gore?
Let me ask you a question, Ross. You played in the league. Obviously, I did not. You did. For a running back to play as long as he did at a really high level, okay, one can debate where he stands on a yearly basis. Was he the best back in the league? People say he wasn't ever the best back in the league. But to play, you played for 15 years, give or take, at a really high level at running back. How many guys have ever done that?
Not many.
If any.
I'm amazed.
I mean, to me, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but I doubt that will happen. But, I don't buy into the argument that, well, he was never the best runner in the league in any given season. That position is not one that we normally associate with long-term durability, correct?
Correct.
And for him to do what he did and show up every week, I only think there were 1 or 2 seasons where he might have missed a few games. And I'm not talking about his last 2 or 3 years in the league. I'm talking up until whatever year that was. I think that's a really, really remarkable, almost unprecedented achievement. And to me, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I think there's no question in my mind he's a Hall of Famer. I don't know about first ballot or not.
I don't think that'll happen, as I said, but I think he should be, and I really believe he will get in.
Let's talk about some guys that are hoping someday to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Some of the cornerbacks in this draft, Greg. And, I do the same thing every week. I want to know which guy, if any, really stood out to you when you studied this year's corners.
Well, I'm going to start with Ahmad Gardner. I really liked his tape. I actually watched him last summer from 2020. And then, of course, this year, And I think he just fits the profile of the long. He's 6'3", Ross, the long, rangy, athletic, competitive corner that everybody wants. He was the boundary corner at Cincinnati. He played a ton of press man. He's got really long arms for a corner. He's got a long body. I think he can line up and play press man in the league without a problem. He's got very sticky man-to-man coverage traits. He stayed in phase through routes. He played both what we call mirror match press man, where you don't put your hands on the receiver, and he played physical press man. And he was aggressive and challenging. At times, he was probably very annoying to receivers because he really was physical with them. And he has outstanding play speed. There were a ton of crossing routes that he had to defend watching tape. No one ran away from him. So he's got great play speed, and was aggressive and competitive as a run defender. I just really, really liked his tape a lot. To me, he's the alpha dog corner in this class as far as I'm concerned.
Clearly in your mind.
In my mind, yes.
Is there a guy that's clearly second in your mind?
Well, I think Derek Stingley's a really intriguing player, but I'm going to go to another player before we get to Stingley, whose tape I really, really liked. And that is Trent McDuffie from the University of Washington. He's about the same size as Tre'Davious White. Clearly that size can play outside corner in this league. I just really liked his tape a lot. I like the way he plays. He played a lot of press as well. And he played mirror match for the most part. And again, mirror match means that you don't necessarily put your hands on the receiver. You kind of wait for the receiver to declare his release. And then what you do is you pretty much get in his hip pocket one way or the other, whether it's inside or outside. I thought he had very easy transition, opening his hips. When receivers were released outside, he was extremely physical. He squeezed receivers to the sideline. And I really liked that about him. Now, in the NFL, you have to be a little careful because obviously beyond 5 yards, you've got to release that. But I just thought he was super competitive. I thought he was really good in bail coverage, staying connected to routes. And Washington must teach this really well, Ross, because they've got corners every year. These guys, when they play off or bail coverage, they are so good planting and driving forward with explosive burst. And the other thing that I really liked is when he played zone, great situational awareness. And let me just very quickly explain that, Ross. When it's 3rd and 11 and you see a corner, let's say, playing zone, and how many times do we see corners jump around at 4 yards and then the ball gets caught behind them and it's a first down and it's 3rd and 11? He had a great understanding of the situation. He understood down and distance and its impact on his positioning and his reactions. And I think that's really, really critical.
Yeah, well, I think in general, one thing that is probably not talked about as much as it should be is just how important it is to have football intelligence.
Yep.
Just having they call it FBI or football IQ. I think that's hugely important at every position.
And it's amazing how often you don't see it, to be honest with you.
Oh, yeah.
Well, let's go to Stingley now. You have to go to Stingley.
Stingley,
I went back and I looked, of course, at his 2019 tape when he had that first season, the freshman season, when everybody said this guy will be a top 3 pick in a draft. There's no question, Ross. He has all the physical and athletic traits that teams look for in an outside corner. He's got size. He's good size. Not as big as Gardner, but perfectly good size. Athleticism. He's fluid. There's a suddenness to his movement at times. He's competitive. I thought he was at his best as a press man corner. He's got loose hips. He's got easy transition. The one thing he needs to work on, and I always look for this when I look at press man corners, and it's just something maybe people can take note of as well. When you're playing press and you're not going to be physical, but you're going to play mirror match, a lot of guys, their first reaction to the receiver is they get back on their heels. Okay, Stingley had a tendency to do that. And that just by a fraction slows down your reaction. He could compensate for that in college without a problem. And in the NFL, it may be a little different just because of the quality of receivers he'll be competing against. Now, that's a very fixable thing, but he had a tendency to just kind of lean back on his heels, and then you have to sort of get back on the balls of your feet to react. And it seems minor, but it's not. I didn't think he was quite as comfortable or as good playing off coverage as he was playing press. And the thing that he has better than any corner that I've watched, I haven't seen them all, so I don't want people to say, oh, what about this guy? So I haven't seen them all, but he has great ball production and ball skills being a former receiver. Vertical throws outside the numbers, which are a big part of the NFL game. He made interceptions. He got his hands on balls. I mean, he has great ball production.
Okay, but Greg, what did you see the last 2 years?
The traits are still there. He just only played 10 games. I mean, the traits, I went back to 2019 only because he played a full season. And I did watch 2020 and all his games in 2021. The traits are there. And again, I'm not going to comment. People say, well, he didn't try hard. I didn't see that on tape, to be honest with you. And I'm not going to speak to what's in his mind. So, that doesn't mean anything to me. I'd have to interview the kid to know that, and that's not going to happen. So I'm not going to speak to that. So I think the traits are there.
How about Andrew Booth Jr. from Clemson?
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy as well. He played a lot of man and zone, probably as much zone maybe as any corner that I've seen. Again, not having seen them all. Booth was a player that I really liked. Another corner that had a great feel for zone, kind of like Trent and McDuffie. And by that, I mean, when you play zone, what do you hear all the time from coaches? Eye discipline. You have to play with your eyes. And I thought he had a great understanding of receiver location and distribution, receiver splits in zone coverage. His body and his eyes were in the right place. He had a great feel for route concepts based on receiver splits. He was savvy. He was aware. And he could also play, press coverage as well. And he had very good snaps watching his tape playing mirror match press man. Also could be physical. And the one thing about this kid is he was aggressive. You just saw it as, maybe as physical as any corner that I watched, along with McDuffie. You could tell that Booth embraced the physical nature of the game. You could tell he was not only willing to hit and tackle, but he relished it. He wanted to play that way. He wanted the game to be physical.
Ooh, that's awesome. I love hearing that. Is there another guy out of Roger McCreary, Kaiir, Elam, Kyler Gordon? Is there another guy that jumped out to you?
McCreary's fascinating because his tape's really good, but he's going to have an issue with some teams because and again, maybe this sounds crazy, but his arm length is under 29 inches, I believe. And I think there's only been one corner drafted in the last 10 years with arm length under 29. I think that's true. That can be checked. And that's going to be a concern. But his tape is really, really good. And I just don't know how teams will view that. And because obviously that seems to be a boundary marker, Ross, for teams, because they just don't draft guys with arm length like Roger McCreary. So I don't know exactly what to make of it other than what the track record is.
Man, I watched him in a few games, and I'm no cornerback expert, but against Penn State, against Alabama, I thought he was really good.
Well, it's funny you say that because I watched him against LSU and Alabama, obviously, and he matched up numerous times to Kayshon Boutte, or is it Boutte, who's going to come out next year and probably be a top 20 pick from LSU and did a great job. And against Alabama, he matched up to both Jamison Williams and John Mechie and was really good playing press coverage in both of those games. And I really, really like his tape. Love the way he plays. Another guy whose measurables are pretty similar to Tre'Davious White. So again, I just don't know what to make of the arm length. Then you mentioned Elam from Florida. Elam's another a guy that whose tape that I liked as well. I think he's a fascinating prospect. He's another guy who's long. He's over 6'1", ran really well. He's got length. He's got physicality. He's got high level competitiveness. He's got a swagger to him. A lot of these guys, though, in college, because you can do it, they tend to be a little too grabby through the routes. You can do that in college. You can't do that in the NFL. But he also, like McDuffie, did a really good job because he was the boundary corner for Florida. He did a really good job of squeezing receivers to the sideline when they released outside. And he played, when you watched his tape, you felt like, man, this guy plays strong. He plays with a physical presence. So Elam was another guy that I really liked.
I don't know if it's a physical presence, Greg, but you sure as heck bring a presence every single week when you come on the show. I absolutely love it. Love getting some surprise wisdom from Greg Cosell on a Wisdom Wednesday. Next week, we will dive into the edge rushers. Really curious to hear what you have to say about the edge rushers. Check Greg out on social media at Greg Cosell. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross.
So I mentioned earlier, by the way, that I am in California right now. It's now 6:15 a.m. And on the flight out, at the airport, now in the hotel, all three, I've got ExpressVPN on. Because watching any shows or even being on your computer without using ExpressVPN is like going to a casino and only being able to play in the slot machines. Why limit yourself like that? You don't want to do that. So first of all, ExpressVPN has blazing fast speeds. Like I was watching videos on the plane with no issues whatsoever. I was actually watching Penn State recruit videos for this Keystone Sports Network thing I do. You can connect with any of your devices. The servers work in 94 different countries. They've got servers in 94 different countries. So any show that you want to watch, it's pretty much almost always going to be on Netflix in one of these other countries. So you can just use, if you'd like, Netflix and the ExpressVPN to be able to watch what you want. So be smart. Stop paying full price for streaming services and only getting access to a fraction of their content. Get your money's worth at expressvpn.com/Tucker. Don't forget to use my personal link at expressvpn.com/Tucker to get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free.
Tuck's Takes.
Morning, Ross. You and Greg obviously touched on it, but let's talk about that Stephon Diggs 4-year, $96 million extension from the Bills. It includes $70 million guaranteed and puts him under contract for the next 6 seasons.
So I think it's really interesting because he was already under contract for 2 more years. They'd already given him a deal. They didn't need to do this. But I think what this is the Bills saying, we don't want to get into a Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill situation where he's not happy and he wants to go elsewhere for more money. We don't want to get to that point, number one. Number two, if we know we're going to want him for the next 4 or 5 years with our franchise quarterback, Josh Allen, the price isn't going to go down. It's only going to go up. So while the Bills didn't need to do this, and they could have waited a year, maybe 2, then franchise had him. They could have played hardball with Diggs. I think they realize there's not a whole lot to gain by that long term. What they're going to gain is making sure Josh Allen has his number one guy for years to come and that Diggs is happy because they know they got a chance to do some really special things in Western New York over the next couple of years. I like it.
Tuck's Takes.
Eagles and Saints made a huge trade. Eagles trading at number 16, number 19, and number 194th. That's in the 6th round. To the Saints, these are all draft picks, obviously. For number 18 and number 101, that's in the 3rd round, and a 7th rounder, number 237, 2023 first round pick, 2024 second round pick. Essentially, 1, 2, and a 3 for this year's number 1.
Right. I don't really understand this from the Saints' perspective. I understand that there's some discount for future picks, but I believe that the Eagles and some other teams, but certainly the Eagles and Howie Roseman, have taken advantage of that flaw in the market, because future picks should not be discounted as much as they are. They used to say, well, it's a round later. Man, I don't see how you look at it that way. If you just swap the 19 and the 18 and the 6th rounder and the 7th rounder, as you said, Bri, the Eagles are getting a 1, 2, and a 3 for this year's 1. And the Saints now have pick 19 and pick 16. I guess I just don't really understand it. I mean, for what? I mean, maybe they're going to package those 2 picks to move up and get a quarterback. I guess that would make some sense to me. There's some reports out there that they feel like they're very close to being a playoff team, and this way they'll get 2 good starters. I don't know if I really believe that. I think maybe that's what they're putting out there so that people don't think they're going to try to get a quarterback. But I think this is a slam dunk deal for the Eagles. I didn't think they were ever going to use all 3 first-round picks for a lot of reasons, including the financial one. I always thought they would try to get another first-round pick next year. They got it done. I did not think they'd be able to also get 2nd and 3rd round picks for that first-round pick. And by the way, the Saints might not be that good. Dennis Allen as head coach, not Sean Payton, Jameis Winston, or maybe a rookie at quarterback. Saints might not be that great. And if that's the case, wow, that move will look even better for the Eagles, because maybe it ends up being a top 10, top 15 pick.
Tuck's Takes.
Sticking with the Saints for a minute, they cut quarterback Blake Bortles, and in other news, the Falcons signed Damiere Byrd.
So my understanding on the Saints cutting Bortles is he asked to be released after they signed Andy Dalton, which makes sense. Damiere Byrd, if you're a receiver, you should want to go to Atlanta right now, at least if you want playing time. I mean, their receivers are not good. If you want playing time, you want to start, you want to get targets, Atlanta's the place to go right now, although I suspect that they will end up, getting at least one receiver in the draft.
Tuck's Takes.
The NFL continuing to wanting to make the sport more of an international event, pushing for flag football to become an Olympic sport.
Thought that was interesting. Yeah, I saw that, Bri. And it's interesting because the chief operating officer of NFL International is a former college teammate of mine, Damani Leach. He was a senior corner when I was a freshman defensive end. He started, I think it might have been all Ivy League for 3 years. He was an excellent player. And I think someone was telling me here at the NFL's broadcast boot camp that they were able to get flag football into the world games. The more flag football becomes prominent in these international events, then the more countries will put money into getting better at flag football, which I think the NFL hopes will lead to more people becoming football fans and more people playing football. It all makes perfect sense to me, and I think it's great. I think flag football is great. I'm a huge fan of flag football for boys and girls, really of any age, but especially when they're younger. It's a great way to play the sport without having to worry about the injuries or the contact. I think it's phenomenal. I'm glad. You guys know how I feel about it. There's millions of little kids out there that think soccer is the best sport. Imagine that. Can you imagine if I was born somewhere else? Oh my God, I would not have been a pro soccer player, and I would never have realized that football is the greatest game ever. Absolutely ever. I do realize that you guys are the greatest listeners ever. People like Pizza Boy Brewing, Sporticulture, HumanHeadNYC.com, SteakhouseSports.com, Go-Bengals.com, Evergreen Economics, and MyFrontPageStory.com with Mother's Day coming up. Check out the Fantasy Feast today. It is a really interesting lesson on how well free agents do when they switch teams. So it's not just a fantasy show. It's something everyone should be interested in. How well do free agents typically do when they switch teams? That'll be on today's Fantasy Feast. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for listening to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Fantasy Feast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.
A lot of times on the show, I mentioned DraftKings. Here's what you need to know. You got to be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. By the way, if what I was talking about included a deposit bonus, doesn't always, sometimes it does. Deposit bonus requires 25 times playthrough, and deposit bonuses are paid out in site credit.